I was halfway through skinning a 12-point buck when my phone buzzed with an email that would change everything. The subject line read, "Notice of Property Seizure Willow Creek HOA Board Decision." My hands, slick with blood and fat, fumbled with the device as I tried to make sense of what I was reading. They wanted my hunting cabin, the one my grandfather built with his own hands in 1967. The one that sat on 40 acres of pristine Montana wilderness, surrounded by lodge-pole pines and a creek so clear you could count pebbles at 10 feet deep. I'm Sebastian Quincy, and I'd been living a quiet life in Willow Creek, Montana, for the past 3 years. Most people knew me as the guy who worked remotely for a tech company in Seattle while enjoying the mountain life. What they didn't know was that I owned considerably more land than they realized. The hunting cabin sat deep in the woods, accessible by a private road that wound through dense forest for nearly 2 miles. It wasn't fancy, just a solid 2-bedroom structure with a stone fireplace, a covered porch, and enough room to process game during hunting season. The email claimed that the Willow Creek Homeowners Association had conducted a vote and decided to seize the cabin and surrounding community land to build a recreation center. They cited some obscure clause about underutilized community resources and eminent domain provisions allegedly written into the HOA bylaws. The notice gave me 14 days to vacate the property or face legal action. I read it 3 times, each reading making my blood pressure climb higher. The thing was, I'd never signed any HOA agreement. When I bought my property 3 years ago, the real estate agent mentioned that there was a small HOA that managed the main residential area of Willow Creek, but my land was explicitly outside their jurisdiction. My parcel was grandfathered in, predating the HOA by decades. I wiped my hands on my jeans and called my attorney, Marcus Rivera, a sharp lawyer based in Missoula who'd handled my property purchase. He answered on the second ring. "Marcus, I need you to pull every document related to my Willow Creek property. The HOA is claiming they can seize my hunting cabin." There was a pause. "The HOA, Sebastian, your property isn't part of any HOA. We made sure of that during the purchase." "I know. But apparently they don't know that, or they're choosing to ignore it. Email me whatever they sent you. I'll look into this immediately." I forwarded the notice and finished processing the deer, my mind racing through scenarios. The cabin meant everything to me. It was where I went to escape the digital world, where I could sit on the porch at dawn with coffee and watch elk graze in the meadow below. It was where my grandfather had taught my father to hunt, and where my father had taught me. The walls held 3 generations of memories, carved into the log beams with initials and dates marking successful hunts, birthdays celebrated, and quiet moments of reflection. 2 days later, I drove into the main Willow Creek residential area for the first time in months. The development was one of those planned communities that had sprouted up in the last 15 years, catering to wealthy retirees and remote workers seeking the Montana experience without actually roughing it. Cookie-cutter houses with vinyl siding, manicured lawns that seemed absurd in ranch country, and streets named after the wildlife that had been displaced to build them. Elk Ridge Drive, Bear Mountain Way, Eagle's Nest Court. The HOA office was located in a small building next to the community pool. I walked in to find a woman in her late 40s sitting behind a desk, her blonde hair styled in that specific cut that seemed to be issued with HOA board positions. Her nameplate read Brenda Hutchins, HOA President. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone already defensive. "I'm Sebastian Quincy." I received a notice about property seizure. Her expression shifted to something between smugness and irritation. Oh yes, Mr. Quincy. We've been trying to reach you for months about bringing your property into compliance. Compliance with what? I'm not part of this HOA. Brenda pulled out a folder, her movements deliberate and practiced. According to our records, all properties within the Willow Creek boundaries fall under HOA jurisdiction as of the 2022 expansion vote. Your cabin sits on what we've designated as community recreation land. That's interesting because I've owned that land since 2023 and it was never part of any HOA then. My grandfather owned it before me since 1967. The deed is clear. She gave me a patronizing smile that made my teeth clench. Mr. Quincy, I understand you're upset, but the board has voted. We've conducted surveys, consulted with our legal team, and determined that the best use of that underutilized space is a community recreation center. The cabin itself is, frankly, an eyesore and doesn't meet our community standards. Your community standards don't apply to my private property. That's where you're wrong. She slid a document across the desk. This is the expanded boundary map approved by the county. As you can see, your cabin falls within the red line. I looked at the map. It was clearly doctored, the boundary line drawn to conveniently include my 40 acres. This is fraudulent. The county never approved this. I assure you, everything is legal and proper. Now, you have 12 days remaining to remove your personal belongings. After that, the HOA will take possession and begin demolition. Demolition. The word came out harder than I intended. The structure doesn't meet code for public use. It'll need to come down. But don't worry, you'll have access to the new recreation center once it's built. There will be a gym, yoga studio, and a community gathering space. Much better than some old hunting shack. I leaned forward, keeping my voice level. That old hunting shack is on my private property, which I own free and clear. You're not demolishing anything. Brenda's smile disappeared. Mr. Quincy, if you don't comply voluntarily, we'll obtain a court order. I suggest you cooperate. This community doesn't need troublemakers. I left before I said something I'd regret. Back in my truck, I called Marcus. Tell me you found something. Oh, I found something all right. Marcus sounded excited. Sebastian, you know exactly how much land you own in Willow Creek. 40 acres around the cabin, plus the 3-acre lot where my main house sits in town. Not quite. When your grandfather bought that land in 1967, he purchased a much larger parcel, 240 acres to be exact. Over the years, portions were sold off, including the land where the current HOA community sits. But here's the thing. Your family retained something called a master deed clause. Essentially, any land sold from the original parcel remains subject to certain restrictions and rights held by the owner of the master deed. That's you. I sat up straighter. What kind of restrictions? Primarily, it prevents the land from being used for certain commercial purposes without your approval. It was your grandfather's way of protecting the area's character. When the HOA development was built, they should have gotten your father's approval. They didn't. And there's more. The access road to your cabin. It cuts through the HOA development. That road is a legal easement that predates the HOA by 40 years. They can't block it, and they certainly can't claim the land it leads to. So the HOA has no legal standing whatsoever. None. In fact, I'd argue they're in violation of your property rights just by claiming jurisdiction. Want me to file an injunction? Do it. And Marcus, let's arrange a survey. I want every inch of my property marked and documented. Already on it. I've got a surveyor heading out tomorrow. The next week was a flurry of activity. The surveyor, a grizzled man named Tom who'd been working in Montana for 30 years, spent 3 days walking my property with GPS equipment and old survey maps. What he found was even better than Marcus had suggested. "Sebastian, you need to see this," Tom said, spreading a new map across the hood of his truck. We were standing at the entrance to the HOA development, where a decorative stone wall proclaimed "Welcome to Willow Creek Estates." "This entire development," Tom tapped the map, "is built on land that was part of your grandfather's original parcel. The developers bought it from your uncle in 1998, but look here." He pointed to a series of notes on the survey. The master deed restrictions were never properly released. Every property owner in this HOA technically needs your approval for major structural changes or commercial use. You're telling me I have veto power over the entire HOA. More than that. The community pool, the HOA office, the playground, all of it was built without satisfying the master deed requirements. Now, it's been long enough that you probably couldn't force them to tear anything down, but you absolutely have standing to prevent any new construction or major changes. I looked at the neat rows of houses, the pristine common areas, the volleyball court where a group of residents were playing. An idea began forming. "Tom, where exactly is the HOA planning to build this recreation center?" He checked his notes. "According to the permits they filed, right on top of your cabin, extending about 3 acres north. All my land. Every square foot." The HOA board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. I wasn't invited, but Montana's open meeting laws meant I could attend anyway. I showed up 15 minutes early with Marcus and a folder full of documents. The community center where they held meetings was already packed. Apparently, the recreation center proposal was popular. I recognized several faces from town, people I'd seen at the grocery store or the coffee shop. They were excited, chatting about fitness classes and social events. Brenda Hutchins sat at a table at the front with 4 other board members, 2 men and 2 women, all looking pleased with themselves. She noticed me and her expression soured. "Mr. Quincy, this is a closed session for HOA members only." Marcus stood. "Actually, Miss Hutchins, Montana law requires all HOA meetings to be open to affected parties. My client is certainly affected by your proposed actions." One of the male board members, a thick-necked man whose name tag read Dale Pritchard, Vice President, leaned forward. "This is just a formality session. The vote already passed. We're here to discuss implementation." "Then you won't mind us observing," I said, taking a seat in the front row. Brenda's jaw tightened, but she couldn't argue without looking worse. She turned to the crowd. "Let's begin. As you all know, the board has approved the seizure and redevelopment of the abandoned property at the end of Old Mill Road. Tonight, we're reviewing the architectural plans for our new recreation center." "It's not abandoned," I said clearly. "Mr. Quincy, you're out of order. This isn't an open forum. And this isn't your property to seize." The room went silent. Brenda's face flushed red. "We've been over this. The property falls within HOA boundaries." Marcus stood again, pulling out the survey map. "May I approach?" Without waiting for permission, he walked to the front and spread the map on their table. "This is a certified survey completed this week by a licensed Montana surveyor. As you can see, Mr. Quincy's property is clearly outside your jurisdiction. It predates your HOA by decades and was never included in the development plat." Dale grabbed the map, studying it. His confidence wavered. "This can't be right. Our lawyer said we had clear authority." "Your lawyer was wrong," Marcus said. "But it gets better, or worse from your perspective. This is a copy of the master deed from 1967. He placed another document down. "Mr. Quincy's grandfather owned all the land your development sits on. When portions were sold, he retained certain rights. Rights that were never properly transferred or released." Brenda snatched the document, her eyes scanning frantically. This doesn't mean anything. It's too old. It's legally binding, Marcus said calmly. And it means that every major construction project in this HOA requires Mr. Quincy's approval, which he definitely isn't giving for a recreation center on his private hunting cabin. The crowd murmured, confusion spreading. A woman in the third row raised her hand. Are you saying the HOA doesn't actually own the land? The HOA doesn't own Mr. Quincy's 40 acres, correct, Marcus confirmed. They never did. Another board member, a thin woman named Patricia something, spoke up. But our attorney assured us this was community property. We paid for surveys and legal opinions. I'd love to see those surveys, Marcus said, because they're either fraudulent or your attorney misread them dramatically. Brenda stood, her voice rising. This is ridiculous. We're not going to let one person obstruct progress for the entire community. We have rights too. You have the right to manage your own property, I said, standing. Not mine. And if you attempt to set foot on my land or interfere with my access, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. You can't threaten us, Dale blustered. That's not a threat, it's a fact. Marcus, show them the rest. My attorney produced another document. This is an injunction granted yesterday by Judge Hartman in the district court. It prevents the HOA from taking any action against Mr. Quincy's property, blocking his access, or continuing to claim jurisdiction over his land. Violation of this injunction will result in contempt charges. The room erupted in conversation. Brenda tried to restore order, banging a gavel that seemed comically inadequate for the chaos. Several residents approached the board table, demanding explanations. One man, older with a gray beard, pointed at Brenda. You told us this was a done deal. My wife and I donated $5,000 to the Recreation Center Fund. Are you saying that money was for nothing? We can still build the center, Brenda insisted. We'll find another location. Where? Patricia asked. We don't have any other suitable land. That's why we chose the cabin site in the first place. I cleared my throat, and the room gradually quieted. I want to make something clear. I don't have any problem with this community or the people who live here. Most of you seem like good folks who got caught up in bad leadership. But that cabin is my family's legacy. It's not for sale, it's not for seizure, and it's not being demolished for a yoga studio. Then what do you suggest? Someone called out. We do need community space. That's your problem to solve, not mine. But I'll tell you what I won't tolerate: being lied to, having my property rights violated, and being threatened by an HOA board that clearly doesn't understand the law. Brenda slammed her hand on the table. Get out, both of you. This meeting is over. Actually, Marcus said, we have one more thing. He placed a final document on the table. This is a notice of legal action against the HOA board members individually for attempted property theft, fraud, and harassment. We're seeking damages, legal fees, and a formal apology. Dale's face went pale. You can't sue us individually. The HOA insurance covers board actions. It covers good faith mistakes, Marcus corrected, not deliberate fraud. And when we depose your attorney and find out what you were really told versus what you chose to hear, I think we'll have a very strong case. We left while the board scrambled to contain the fallout. In the parking lot, I could hear raised voices through the community center windows. Several residents followed us out. The gray-bearded man approached. Mr. Quincy, I'm George Hendricks. I want to apologize. Most of us had no idea the board was pulling something like this. Brenda told us it was abandoned county land. I appreciate that, George. For what it's worth, there's going to be an emergency recall vote. A lot of us have been unhappy with how Brenda runs things. This might be the push we needed. Over the next few days, The story spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. The local newspaper, the Willow Creek Gazette, ran a front-page article. HOA board attempted illegal land seizure. The reporter, a young woman named Jennifer, had done her homework, pulling public records that showed the board had been warned by their own attorney that the land claim was questionable. But they'd proceeded anyway. My phone rang constantly. Some calls were from angry HOA members who still somehow thought I was the villain, but most were from residents who were appalled by what the board had done. Several offered support, including testimony about other questionable board actions. Marcus filed the lawsuit on Monday. By Wednesday, 3 of the 5 board members had resigned. Brenda and Dale held on, insisting they'd done nothing wrong. Then things got interesting. I was at the cabin, reinforcing some fence posts when I heard vehicles coming up the access road. 3 trucks moving fast. I recognized Dale's oversized pickup in the lead. They pulled up to the cabin in a cloud of dust and 6 men got out. Dale, plus 5 others I vaguely recognized from town. "Quincy," Dale called out. "We need to talk." I set down my post hole digger, noting that 2 of the men carried shotguns. "Those guns for hunting or intimidation. We're just protecting ourselves. You made some serious accusations against the board." I stated facts. "There's a difference." One of the other men, younger with a military haircut, stepped forward. "Look, man, this whole thing has gotten out of hand. The community needs that recreation center. Maybe we got a little aggressive with the legal stuff, but the principle is sound. This land should be for everyone. It's my land. Private property. Says so on the deed, the survey, and a court injunction. Deeds can be wrong," Dale said. "And courts make mistakes. Is that a threat? It's reality. You're one guy against an entire community. Be smart about this." I pulled out my phone, making sure they could see I was recording. "Let me be clear. You've come onto my property, armed, to intimidate me into giving up my legal rights. That's trespassing and menacing at minimum." "Put the phone away," the military guy said, his hand moving toward his shotgun. "I wouldn't." The new voice came from behind Dale's group. Sheriff Tom Blackwell stepped out from the tree line, his own rifle cradled casually. Behind him were 2 deputies. "Gentlemen, I've been watching this little gathering with great interest." I'd called Tom that morning after a disturbing voicemail from Dale. The sheriff had suggested he station himself nearby just in case. Dale's confidence evaporated. "Sheriff, we were just talking to Mr. Quincy about the property situation. With guns, on his private land, after a court injunction." Tom shook his head. "Dale, I've known you for 10 years. I never figured you for stupid." "This is blown out of proportion," Dale protested. "Here's what's going to happen," Tom said, his voice hardening. "You're going to leave. Now, if Mr. Quincy wants to press charges for trespassing and menacing, that's his right. If any of you come back here without his permission, you'll be arrested. Clear?" The 6 men exchanged glances. The military guy started to argue, but Dale grabbed his arm. "Let's go." They loaded back into their trucks and left. Tom waited until the sound of engines faded before lowering his rifle. "You all right, Sebastian?" "Yeah, thanks for the backup. This HOA thing is getting out of control. I've got 3 more complaints about harassment. Apparently, Brenda has been going door to door, pressuring residents to sign a petition against you." "A petition for what?" "Forcing you to sell. She's claiming you're blocking community progress." Tom sighed. "The thing is, she's got about 40% of the HOA buying her story. They see you as the outsider causing problems." "I'm causing problems. They tried to steal my land." "I know. But Brenda's good at spinning narratives. She's telling people that your grandfather's deed is a legal loophole that lets you control the whole development. that you could shut down the HOA entirely if you wanted. Could I? According to what Marcus told me, maybe. You've got rights under that master deed that could make things complicated for them. An idea crystallized. Tom, what if I offered a compromise? What kind of compromise? Let me think on it. That evening, I sat on my cabin porch with a beer, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The property was beautiful in the fading light, the creek catching gold and amber reflections. This land represented everything I valued: freedom, privacy, connection to family history. But I wasn't a cruel person. The people in Willow Creek Estates weren't my enemies, even if their board was corrupt. I called Marcus. What would happen if I released the master deed restrictions, legally? It would give the HOA full autonomy over their property. They wouldn't need your approval for anything. Why? Because this fight isn't really about my cabin. It's about control. Brenda wants to prove she's in charge and I'm the obstacle. But what if I removed myself from the equation? Sebastian, that deed is valuable. It gives you leverage. I don't want leverage over my neighbors. I just want them to leave me alone. What are you thinking? I outlined my idea. Marcus was silent for a long moment. That might work, but you need to be careful. If you give up the master deed restrictions without getting something ironclad in return, they could come after your cabin again in the future. So we make it ironclad. Marcus drew up the agreement over the next 2 days. It was simple. I would permanently release all master deed restrictions on the HOA development, giving them complete autonomy, in exchange for a recorded easement that explicitly excluded my 40 acres and guaranteed my access road in perpetuity. Additionally, the HOA would pay my legal fees and issue a public apology for the attempted seizure. I presented the offer at a community meeting I specifically requested. This time, the meeting was held in the high school gymnasium because so many residents wanted to attend. Word had spread, and people were curious about the outcome. Brenda sat at a table with Dale and a new attorney, a sharp-looking woman from Missoula. The other 3 board positions remained vacant after the resignations. I stood at a microphone in front of maybe 200 people. I'm not here to fight with anyone. I've prepared a settlement offer that I think addresses everyone's concerns. Marcus distributed copies of the agreement. The crowd murmured as people read it. George Hendricks stood up. If I'm reading this right, you're giving up your rights over our properties in exchange for us leaving yours alone. That's correct. The master deed was never something I intended to use. My grandfather put those restrictions in place for his time, not mine. You should be able to manage your community however you see fit, without me having any say. All I want is my cabin and the guarantee that this never happens again. A woman in the middle section raised her hand. What about the recreation center? We still need community space. That's your decision to make. Build it on HOA land if you have any suitable, or don't build it. That's not my problem to solve. Brenda finally spoke. This is a trick. He's trying to make himself look generous while sabotaging our plans. Actually, the new attorney said quietly, this is a very fair offer. Miss Hutchins, if we go to trial, we will lose. Mr. Quincy has an airtight case. This settlement gets the HOA out from under the master deed restrictions, which are actually quite burdensome if he chose to enforce them, and it only costs us the legal fees and an apology. I'm not apologizing, Brenda said flatly. Then resign, someone shouted from the crowd. Others joined in, a chorus of agreement. Dale leaned toward Brenda, saying something I couldn't hear. She shook her head violently. The new attorney looked embarrassed. George stood again. I move that we accept Mr. Quincy's settlement offer and hold an immediate recall vote for the remaining board members. Second, 3 people called simultaneously. The vote was overwhelming. 173 in favor, 12 against, 6 abstentions. Brenda and Dale were recalled by similar margins. As the results were announced, Brenda stood abruptly, knocking her chair backward. "You're all fools," she shouted. "That land should be ours. This entire community could have been something special, but you're letting one selfish man ruin it." "He's offering us a fair deal," George countered. "You're the one who created this mess by lying about owning his property." "I didn't lie. Our attorney said we had a case." The Missoula attorney stood. "Miss Hutchins, I need to clarify. I was hired 3 days ago to replace your previous attorney. I've reviewed the file, and I found correspondence from him explicitly warning you that Mr. Quincy's property was not subject to HOA jurisdiction. You proceeded anyway." The gymnasium went dead silent. "That's not. He said we could argue community interest," Brenda stammered. "He said you could argue it. He also said you'd likely lose and face liability. You withheld that information from the board and the membership." Dale looked stricken. "Brenda, you told us the attorney approved the action." "He did approve it." "He approved you having the right to make a bad decision," the attorney corrected. "There's a difference. Miss Hutchins, you may want to consult with a personal attorney." Brenda grabbed her purse and stormed out. Dale followed, though he paused at the door, looking back at the crowd with something like regret. The meeting continued for another hour, with the membership electing an interim board and officially accepting my settlement. Marcus and the HOA attorney notarized the agreement on the spot. My 40 acres were permanently protected, my access guaranteed, and the master deed restrictions were released. As people filed out, dozens stopped to shake my hand or apologize. George was among the last to leave. "Sebastian, on behalf of the sane residents, thank you for being reasonable about this." "You're welcome. And George, I hope you find a good spot for that recreation center," he laughed. "Actually, Patricia suggested we convert the old community center building. It's big enough if we add a second story, no new land needed." "That's a smart solution. It was always there. We just had leadership more interested in empire building than problem solving." Over the following weeks, things settled down. The HOA filed the easement with the county, making my property protection a matter of permanent public record. Marcus sent a bill for legal services that made me wince, but it was worth it. Brenda and Dale faced consequences beyond just losing their positions. Several residents filed a civil suit against them personally for misappropriating HOA funds in the recreation center scheme. It turned out they'd spent nearly $80,000 on plans, permits, and legal fees for a project they didn't have the legal right to pursue. The suit alleged that they'd acted negligently, if not fraudulently, and should be held personally liable. I wasn't part of that suit. My fight was over, but I followed the news with interest. The real surprise came 2 months later. I was at the cabin, preparing for elk season, when Sheriff Tom drove up the access road. "Sebastian, got a minute, always. Coffee, please." We sat on the porch, mugs in hand, watching a hawk circle over the meadow. "I wanted to give you a heads up," Tom said. "We're arresting Brenda Hutchins tomorrow." "For what?" "Fraud and embezzlement." The civil investigation triggered a criminal one. Turns out Brenda wasn't just incompetent, she was stealing. Over the past 3 years, she skimmed about $50,000 from HOA accounts. Small amounts, hidden in expense reports and fake invoices. The recreation center push was partly about building something big and complicated where she could hide even more. I whistled. 50,000, give or take. The forensic accountant is still working through the records. Dale might face charges too, but it looks like he was mostly just stupid and loyal to Brenda. She was the mastermind. Does the HOA know? They will tomorrow. I wanted you to hear it first, given everything you went through. I appreciate that. Tom sipped his coffee. You know what's funny? If Brenda had just left you alone, she probably could have kept stealing for years. The membership wasn't paying close attention, but going after your cabin made everyone scrutinize everything the board did. She got greedy and blew up her own scheme. Some people can't help themselves. True enough. The next day, the Gazette ran another front-page story. Former HOA president arrested for embezzlement. The article detailed the charges and included interviews with shocked residents. Brenda's mugshot showed a woman who looked 10 years older than she had at that first meeting, her face haggard and defiant. The legal process played out over the next several months. Brenda initially fought the charges, insisting she'd done nothing wrong and that the HOA's accounting was just disorganized. But the evidence was overwhelming. Fake invoices for landscaping that never happened, inflated costs for supplies that were purchased at half the reported price, personal expenses run through the HOA credit card. In the end, she pled guilty to felony theft and fraud. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in state prison and ordered restitution of $62,000, the final amount the forensic accountant had documented. Dale avoided criminal charges but was found liable in the civil suit. He ended up paying $20,000 to the HOA and moved out of Willow Creek entirely. Life returned to normal, or a new version of it. The HOA elected a solid board of pragmatic people who focused on actual community needs rather than grandiose projects. They converted the old community center like George suggested, adding a second floor with a gym and meeting spaces. It wasn't fancy, but it served the purpose. I continued my quiet routine, working remotely and spending weekends at the cabin. Hunting season that fall was spectacular. I got a bull elk on opening day, a beautiful 6x6 that I spotted from the same stand my grandfather had built in 1970. As I processed the elk in the cabin, I thought about how close I'd come to losing this place. If I hadn't kept the property documents, if Marcus hadn't been thorough, if the surveyor hadn't found the master deed, things could have gone very differently. But I'd also learned something about community and conflict. Most of the Willow Creek residents were decent people who'd been misled by corrupt leadership. Once the truth came out, they'd done the right thing. It would have been easy to paint everyone with the same brush, to see the whole HOA as the enemy. But that wouldn't have been fair or accurate. One Saturday in late October, I was stacking firewood at the cabin when I heard a vehicle. George Hendricks pulled up in an old Ford truck, waving as he got out. "Hope I'm not intruding," he called. "Not at all. What brings you out here? Wanted to see the famous cabin that started a war." He grinned. "And to invite you to the new community center's opening next weekend. We're having a barbecue, music, the whole deal. I know HOA events might not be your thing, but we'd like you there." "George, I'm not part of the HOA. I know. Consider it a neighbor thing instead. Besides, you should see what we built. You inadvertently inspired us to be smarter about it," I considered. "Will there be beer, cases of it? Then I'll be there." The community center opening was actually fun. The building looked good, with the new second floor blending well with the original structure. Inside was a gym with decent equipment, a yoga studio, a game room, and a large multi-purpose space. Nothing fancy, but functional and well-designed. People were friendly, going out of their way to welcome me. A few apologized again for the whole seizure mess, but mostly folks just wanted to move forward. I met the new board president, a retired engineer named Robert Chen, who seemed incredibly competent and boring in the best possible way. "We're trying to run this HOA like a business," Robert explained over a burger. Clear budgets, transparent decisions, no drama. Boring is good. Boring is very good, I agreed. As the sun set and the party continued, I found myself thinking that maybe community wasn't such a bad thing. I'd always been a loner, preferring the isolation of the cabin to socializing. But there was something nice about being surrounded by neighbors who respected boundaries while still being neighborly. I didn't stay late, slipping out around 8 to head back to the cabin. The drive through the darkening woods was peaceful, my headlights catching the reflection of deer eyes in the underbrush. At the cabin, I built a fire in the stone fireplace and sat with a glass of whiskey, the flames casting dancing shadows on the log walls. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Saw the article about the HOA's new center. Looks like things worked out. I typed back. They did. Thanks for everything. Anytime. Try not to make any more enemies with militant HOAs. I'll do my best. Setting the phone aside, I added another log to the fire and thought about my grandfather. He'd bought this land with money saved from years of working as a carpenter, wanting a place where his family could escape civilization and reconnect with what mattered. He'd been protective of that vision, hence the master deed restrictions. But he'd also been practical. He would have approved of how I'd handled the situation, protecting what was ours while not being needlessly difficult with the neighbors. The cabin creaked in the night wind, familiar sounds that meant home. Outside, the creek burbled over stones, and somewhere in the distance, an elk bugled. This was what I'd fought for, not just the physical structure but the peace and freedom it represented. Winter came to Montana with its usual dramatic intensity. Snow piled 3 feet deep around the cabin, turning the forest into a monochrome wonderland. I spent Christmas there, alone but not lonely, cooking a venison roast in the fireplace and watching old movies on my laptop. On New Year's Eve, I stood on the porch with coffee, watching the stars through crystalline air. The cold was brutal, well below zero, but I was bundled up and the clarity was worth it. I could see the Milky Way stretched across the sky, so many stars they seemed to blur together. My phone rang, startling in the silence. It was George. Happy New Year, Sebastian, or almost anyway. Happy New Year to you too. Listen, the HOA board wanted me to reach out about something. We're putting together a historical preservation committee to document the area's history. Original homesteads, old cabins, that kind of thing. We'd like to include your grandfather's cabin if you're willing. Maybe a plaque on the access road explaining its history. A plaque. Just a small thing. Built 1967 by John Quincy, one of the area's original homesteaders. We want to celebrate the history, not erase it. After everything that happened, we realized this land has stories that matter. I thought about it. My grandfather would have hated any fuss, but he'd also been proud of what he'd built. Yeah, that sounds good. Great. No rush on details. We'll coordinate with you in the spring. After we hung up, I remained on the porch, thinking about how much had changed in 1 year. I'd gone from obscure remote worker to the center of a community controversy, fought a legal battle, and somehow come out the other side with both my property and my relationships intact. The clock on my phone ticked over to midnight. In the distance, I heard fireworks from town, faint pops echoing across the mountains. I raised my coffee mug toward the stars. Here's to property rights, good lawyers, and stupid HOA boards, I said to the empty night, and to family, legacy, and knowing when to fight. Spring arrived slowly in the high country. Snow lingered in shaded areas until late April, and the creek ran high with melt water. I spent weekends at the cabin, cleaning up winter damage and making repairs. The structure had held up well, my grandfather's craftsmanship proving its worth after nearly 60 years. In May, George and the historical committee came out with a small bronze plaque. We mounted it on a stone cairn at the junction where the access road split from the main path. The plaque read, John Quincy Homestead, built 1967, one of the original family properties in the Willow Creek area, preserved by his grandson Sebastian Quincy, 2026. It's perfect, I told George. We added the last line about you. Hope that's okay. What you did matters too, Sebastian. Standing up for property rights and family legacy, but also being willing to compromise where it made sense. That's worth remembering. I just didn't want to lose my cabin. You did more than that. You reminded all of us that rules and laws have to mean something. Brenda thought she could ignore property rights because she had social pressure on her side. You proved her wrong. We stood there in the spring sunshine, looking at the plaque and the forest beyond. Birds sang in the trees, and somewhere nearby, a woodpecker hammered at a dead snag. You know what's funny, George said. That recreation center we all thought was so important. It's nice, but it's just a building. This, he gestured at the forest, this is what really matters. Open space, clean air, connection to history. Brenda wanted to pave over all of that for a yoga studio. People need yoga studios too, I said. Sure. But not at the cost of everything else. Anyway, I'll let you get back to your work. Just wanted to make sure the plaque was right. After he left, I walked up to the cabin and sat on the porch. The plaque was visible from there, a small bronze rectangle catching the sunlight. It felt right, honoring my grandfather while marking my own contribution to the story. My phone buzzed with an email. It was from the local historical society, asking if I'd be willing to give a talk about the property dispute and the importance of historical preservation. I smiled and filed the email to answer later. Maybe I would give the talk, or maybe I wouldn't. For now, I just wanted to enjoy the cabin and the land and the peace I'd fought so hard to protect. That evening, as the sun set behind the western peaks, I grilled a steak on the porch and watched elk emerge from the tree line to graze in the meadow. A big bull, probably the same one I'd seen last fall, led a small herd of cows and calves. They were cautious but not panicked, used to the cabin's presence. This was what my grandfather had built, not just logs and stones, but a place where wild things felt safe, where family could gather, where the modern world's noise faded to background static. The HOA had wanted to turn it into something else, something better in their eyes. But better is subjective. And what they saw as an underutilized eyesore was actually something far more valuable. As darkness fell and the stars emerged, I went inside and built a fire. The flames caught quickly, dry pine crackling and popping. I poured a bourbon, my grandfather's favorite brand, and raised the glass toward the old photograph on the mantel. It showed him standing in front of the half-built cabin in 1967, young and strong, looking proud. We held on to it, Grandpa, I said to the photograph. Just like you wanted. The fire burned warm, the cabin settled into its night sounds, and outside the Montana wilderness stretched endless and protected. Whatever challenges came next, I knew this place would endure. That was worth fighting for. That was worth everything. And somewhere across the creek, in their neat rows of identical houses, the people of Willow Creek Estates lived their lives with a new appreciation for the history around them, and a new wariness about giving too much power to anyone who promised easy solutions. Brenda's attempt to steal my cabin had taught everyone a valuable lesson about the importance of law, property rights, and honest leadership. As for me, I had everything I needed. My cabin, my land, my peace, and the knowledge that when pushed, I'd stood my ground without losing my soul. That was enough. That was more than enough. The cabin would stand for another 60 years, maybe longer, a testament to my grandfather's vision and my determination to preserve it. I fell asleep that night to the sound of the creek and the whisper of wind through pines, content in ways that no community center or HOA amenity could ever provide. Some things are worth fighting for, and some places are worth protecting, no matter what others think they should become. This was one of those places. This was home,